This episode is brought to you by Accenture. When your advertising operations fall out of sync, everything else follows. Spotify and Accenture are working together to reinvent the rhythm of ad sales, using automation, analytics, and smarter workflows to simplify campaign delivery and access better data across the business. The result? Less time spent on operations, more time connecting brands with the moments and fandoms that matter most. Learn more at accenture.com/Spotify.
When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
Hello, difference makers. You are listening to A World of Difference. This is a podcast for the people who still believe that how we lead matters, that the conversations we have across difference, across cultures, across the distance between where we are and where the world needs to go can actually change things. I am Lori Adams Brown, and for over 5 years, I have been bringing global leaders, authors, and change makers to one table. 155,000 downloads, 800 countries, a top 3% podcast, and one conviction that has not changed. The right conversation at the right time with the right people shifts everything. If you are here, you are already a difference maker. And if you want to go deeper, the Difference Makers community is waiting for you at patreon.com/aworldofdifference. $7 a month, the price of a latte, bonus conversations, voting power, and a seat at the table where this conversation continues. The link is in the show notes. And welcome to this week's episode. I hope it inspires you. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. Hi, it's Lori, week 3 of Leading Through Change, and today I'm resurfacing my conversation with Tara May, CEO of Aspiritech, a tech company where more than 90% of the team is autistic. We talk about what she calls the ROI of kindness and why the traits that get someone labeled difficult in one workplace make them extraordinary in another. There's a line in here about what people actually need instead of what's wrong with them. Screenshot it, tag me, tag A World of Difference. When you share it, I read every single one. Hello, Tara. It's exciting to see you today there in Chicago. Just a warm welcome to our sunny California part of Riverside as you're there in cold and snowy Chicago. It's great to see you today.
Great to see you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, it's exciting to talk about what we're going to talk about today. And I think that in the world of work, not only are we seeing some incredible shifts that are both exciting and at times disturbing, but you as CEO of Aspiritech are leading an organization specifically designed to employ autistic adults in tech roles, which is incredible. And sitting here in Silicon Valley, I mean, autistic adults are just a part of all of our tech companies. Their skills are just outstanding. Every time I did training with my engineers that were in the company I most recently exited a big role from, every time I was training them, I always assumed probably 80% of them were autistic or somewhere on the spectrum, just because it's so common and it gave them particular skills, which we love. But what inspired this mission specifically for you, and what is leading this work taught you about really that untapped potential that we see in the neurodivergent community?
Those are both great questions. So for me, the inspiration is twofold, right? On the personal side, I have an autistic son. He's 14. He was diagnosed at 5 and pre-verbal until he was 7. And I think being his mom really shifted the way I looked at the world, right? And seeing his progress and seeing that he is capable of absolutely anything given the right supports made me want to make the world a better and more accepting place for him and for many, many other people like him who are going through the same things, right? But then on the professional side, as you begin to understand neurodiversity, you also understand how deeply woven into each of us the way our brains impact the world is. And we all learn differently and are motivated differently and experience the world differently. And so, as someone who, is deeply inspired by cultural shifts and major transformations and leading that in media companies for most of my professional careers, I really began to see how closely they intersected and how understanding humans and understanding human brains and neurodiversity and motivation can really drive a business return and can really shift the way we think about workplaces, being a more human-centered, universally designed approach. And so I'm really passionate about it from both perspectives.
I share your passion for it. I feel your passion as you're sharing it. And it always breaks my heart when I meet people who put anyone into a box that's not serving them or supporting them. But particularly, I have loved ones in my life who are autistic, and they're some of the most brilliant, um, just people who have given me a lens on life that I would have never had. And I am so grateful to be in their life and what they've taught me. And in the world of work, I have worked with so many autistic individuals in multiple countries, and the way they see the world, some of the pattern recognition specifically, and all types of things have given me insights that have been so valuable to me as a leader. And I think any company who's doing things in such a way as to not support these individuals or to not recruit them as some of the top talent they need, or to just not even consider them as people that would contribute to the ROI of a company, are really missing out. So, as I hear your passion and your advocacy and what you've built, you really are, in addition to working through it in the business, you're a passionate advocate for embracing, autistic identity itself. And so, could you talk about your own journey with neurodiversity and how that personal experience shapes the way you lead and advocate for workforce transformation? As you mentioned, all of us have a difference. All of us, I think that's one of the things Temple Grandin's work has really helped me understand years ago when I read her books, heard her speak, is even the idea that the world has all different types of brains, and we're all as unique as our fingerprint. So we can put it all in this whole idea of a spectrum. But how does your understanding of your own brain, how you work, really contributed to how you understand all of this in general?
Yeah. So, Lori, I love your perspective and even how you kicked off our conversation today, right? Talking about all of these differences. I have sort of two philosophies that drive me. One is that neurodiversity refers to all of us, 100% of us. We all have, you know, 86 billion neurons firing in our brain that impacts the way we experience it. And it's, like you said, as unique as a fingerprint. But when you also piece that together with all the layers of us as humans and all the many identities we have, it's complex and it's nuanced, right? We aren't one thing. We are our gender identity, we are our sexuality, we are our cultural identity, we are our neurodivergent identity, we are our economic identity, right? We are associated with our industry and the work that we love and our hobbies, right? It's so nuanced and so much more complex than I think people like to think of it as, right? We're multifaceted as humans. And I think that's wonderful, right? We shouldn't shy away from that. We should embrace it. And so for me, Aspiritech, yes, is absolutely about offering opportunity to brilliant autistic team members and putting a dent in that 80% unemployment rate that autistic people face. But it's also about creating a workplace that values each of us exactly as we are. and a workplace then impacts the world, right? So you asked about my own personal experiences. Certainly, that of motherhood shapes all of us. So many of us who experience motherhood, it changes you. It changes your identity. But I also know, that late in life, in my 40s, I was diagnosed as OCD, a perfectionist form of OCD. And when you look back on that, right, when I talked about it with my mom and told her about the diagnosis, she sort of laughed and was like, "I could have told you that 20 years ago," right? And I figured out how to take those compulsions and channel them in to ridiculously high performance and C-suite roles and straight A student, and all of those things. But it also comes with needs, right? And I think when we stop and pause and say, it's okay to have needs, that's a really important thing for us to do as people, as leaders, as friends and family members. It is wonderful to showcase our strengths, and it is also okay to have needs. And balancing that complexity of humanity, I think, is, something we're all working toward every day. But it's important to pause and say it out loud.
Isn't it? It feels radical in some ways to just say, well, humans have needs. My gosh, but as I sit here in Silicon Valley working in, coming recently out of manufacturing hardware, AI hardware and data servers and all that, it is not, I mean, I've seen the lived experience of what it can become, not just in the company where I work, but in so many other companies right now, based in Silicon Valley, many of them, where there's this idea that we're all somehow superhuman and have no needs and are the robots themselves. But I keep saying, no, AI is the robot. Let's not try to outshine that because we will never do better than AI at what AI does best. But we don't need to be the robots. We need to be honest about our humanity. And we've not somehow become superhuman. We still need sleep and water and food and relationships and to have a chance for our brains to take time off of this intensity that we do in our workplaces, which, as you said, sometimes, especially in C-suite roles, we have either, some OCD type tendencies that can be used to our detriment personally, or even some hypervigilance people might have developed from trauma, or maybe a neurodivergent situation where they've been masking and it's exhausting. And at some point, there's either burnout that sets in and you keep going without your normal decision-making skills, which we see too often, I think, in C-suite roles or even manager roles. But what you're trying to really bring back to the forefront is that we're all human, we're all different, but we are still the same in the sense that we need the basic things of what it means to be human. How do you see this going forward with your company? What are you trying to do differently? And what can we learn from your experience?
So, a few things, right? One of the things I like to talk about is support, success factors, and accommodations. Because I think sometimes when you say this word accommodation, it feels really scary to people. But to our point that we were just discussing, having needs is not something to be ashamed of or embarrassed about. And Aspiritech has been around for 20 years. And our head of support and inclusion, she often likes to say that in those 20 years, there isn't a specific need or accommodation that she couldn't figure out how to take care of creatively and for free. And there's a really good example I like to give. So I am holding in my hand one of my accommodations, Lori. So I'm a kidney donor. I gave a kidney to my dad about a year ago. One most wonderful experiences of my life. But as a result, I really, really have to work hard to stay hydrated. It's just important for my body and myself. So I carry around this like stupidly large water bottle every second of every day. I sleep with it. I travel with it. It is always by my side. And I like to share that example because nobody thinks twice about it, right? They don't think, oh my gosh, why does she have a water bottle? That's so weird or odd, or that's going to be difficult to accommodate, right? It's not. But to me, it's important. I need that to go about my daily life. And so when I think about the workplace for our 100 autistic team members, it's the exact same thing. It's what do you need to be your best self, to be absolutely successful. One of our team members gets really anxious if someone comes up behind them. And, a lot of open office environments have that sort of like where someone can come up and surprise you over your shoulder. We set him up a workspace that's against a wall, completely free, completely easy, right? And so these examples of really just taking someone's needs, accepting it, removing the stigma, and saying, this will help them be a better employee, a better contributor, a happier person, has so many positive outcomes, not only from a personal perspective, but from a business perspective as well. So a lot of what Aspiritech does is take that and enact it every day to become an incredibly profitable, growing, thriving organization ourselves, which, by the way, makes our employees want to take good care of their customers. And we have a 9.3 net promoter score, but also to teach other organizations that they can do it too. And it's not as hard as we think it is.
Oh, it's so refreshing to hear that. And, most companies will say they value diversity. It could even be one of the words on the wall in terms of company values.
Yeah.
But but neurodiversity often gets overlooked even within that. And so what do you think are the biggest, I guess, misconceptions employers have about autistic employees? And what would you want them to understand about that competitive advantage neurodivergent talent brings?
That is such a great conversation starter. Number one, because neurodiversity is in most cases invisible, right? So you have visible disabilities, like if someone's in a wheelchair or they have crutches, et cetera. And then you have invisible disabilities that you don't know about unless someone discloses and shares with you. So I think that's one of the many reasons why neurodivergent talent is overlooked. I certainly think another is the hiring process and the emphasis we put um, on neurotypical social cues in the hiring process, right? That makes it difficult and a high barrier for our brilliant autistic community. But then I think there's also the fact that when we talk about the disabled community in general, and especially with neurodivergent people, we focus on deficits, right? And we do this from early childhood with neurodivergent people. What do they need to work on? What's wrong with them? What are the skill gaps? And we're doing that in part because we want to help build those gaps and we want to fill them in. But so rarely do we talk about the strengths. And most neurodivergent people have what's referred to as a spiky cognitive profile. So whereas, most neurotypical people have strengths and weaknesses that go a little bit like this, a neurodivergent person might have a big gap, but then also an incredible strength. And we don't spend very much time in the world and in the lives of neurodivergent people talking about those high strengths. We talk all about the deficits, all about the gaps, right? And so really, we spend a lot of time spreading awareness about the strengths, right? You may have someone who's neurodivergent who's an incredibly creative problem solver. Well, who doesn't like that at their workplace? You often can have highly productive people, 150% more productive than neurotypical peers, according to one Harvard Business Review story. You can have, and you referenced it, incredible pattern recognition and incredible visual capabilities that are absolutely stunning, right? So to me, it's about a shift and a reframing of the way we think about neurodivergent brains. And also, again, just humans in general, and focusing on those strengths and how we leverage that value and match it with a business need.
It's so exciting because the neurodivergent individuals that are in my life that I highly respect and mention how much I've learned from them. Every one of those things that you listed were areas I just am in awe about that. Wow, a human brain can do some of the things that they can do. Also, one of the things I've noticed is things such as, holiday parties are going to be very different for a lot of them. Chit chat specifically has not been something they're a huge fan of all the time. And sometimes I'll spot them at the holiday party and just be like, "Hey, you just want to talk about whatever you're working on at work," because that is something I've learned so much from just sitting and listening to the way their brains work and the patterns they're recognizing or their area of expertise. It's just sometimes as if I'm getting an entire encyclopedia downloaded for me. And I'm a learn it all. So I've learned so much just from listening to people such as this whose brains work so differently than mine. And so I think that some of those shifts are not even hard. They're beneficial if we just take advantage of them. So as
So
we talk about,
I'll give you another example, Lori, because I think this
okay.
one's interesting, right? So I've heard it cited, and forgive me, I can't remember the exact percentage, but it's something along the lines of men in meetings will say 3 times as many words as the women in meetings, right? And we also have interesting dynamics in our senior leadership meeting because 80% of our senior leadership team is autistic. So, of course, those dynamics are going to be different. So, my first year at Aspiritech, I was racking my brain and I was thinking, Lori, all about this. I was like, okay, how do I level this playing field? How do I open this up? How do I make sure the quietest voices among us who may have brilliant things to share can share them in this group leadership setting? So, I came up with this idea that we were sort of going to do introverted team building, where rather than doing icebreakers and idea sharing out loud, I would have packs of index cards in front of each person. And so as we went through the questions, rather than feeling compelled to share them around or go around in a circle, we would write them down and then I would share on people's behalfs or we would put it up on a board. And it was incredible the amount of information and compelling statements that were shared from people who might not otherwise have spoken in a meeting, or where there would have been 1 or 2 voices that I know, Lori, you've sat in a meeting where not the smartest person in the room is dominating the conversation, right? And so I was like, well, how do we strip
Yes.
that away? And I just kept thinking to myself the whole time, I wish I would have done this at meetings in my corporate environment. I didn't think about it until I was at Aspiritech because it's staring me right there in the face. But it's something that would have made a major difference in every meeting I've ever held.
So incredible. Some of it is these systems that were built weren't built with these individuals in mind. And we know so much more about the human brain, even in the last 2 to 3 years, than we did when the Industrial Revolution began, which is what a lot of our systems were built for. And it turns out when we accommodate, and like you said, that's a scary word for a lot of people, whether it's in the school setting or at a workplace. But when we learn to accommodate the different ways of being in that system, it turns out most of the time it opens up things for all of us. Like I've had school teachers tell me that, they had an autistic child in their class for the first time and they were having to do this IEP and change the sensory environment of the room. Well, guess what? That sensory environment of the room, once they changed it and made it feel a little less harsh and more cozy, it actually helped all the kids. And it actually taught that teacher some skills they never had and it boosted their own career. And so it isn't just that you're doing something for someone else that's putting you out. You're actually being more human yourself and you're welcoming your own humanity. Because the reality is, I think when it comes to something as scary as the word disability, any of us are one car accident away from being in that category. And so we can other people to a certain extent, but if you've ever had a knee surgery and need to be on crutches, suddenly you realize, wow, there's not a lot of accommodations with opening doors or getting in and out of a parking spot or all these things. There's reasons, there's laws that exist, but all of those are things that any of us could need at some point. And so I think that the more we understand that we're all human and we all need a little help sometimes, then the better our workplaces can be. What are some of the shifts around that you have noticed?
So I think you hit a couple right on the head, right? I mean, certainly um, this idea of universal design is incredibly compelling to a lot of workplaces and leaders. And we often refer to it as this canary in the coal mine concept, right? The neurodivergent person or the disabled person may be the first to notice it, right? Like the need for curb cutouts, for example. But then tons of people benefit, right? Moms with strollers, people with groceries, all of these different things. And it's the exact same thing with workplaces like the classroom you mentioned. We have a beautiful sensory room in our offices but neurotypical people love to use it just as much as the neurodivergent people. It's a great escape. Or like another example, we have different lighting and temperature preferences in different areas of the office because for neurodivergent people, that can sometimes be debilitating. But I have to tell you, also as a woman, having offices set at 67 degrees, which is the optimal temperature for 50 something men, often left me shivering with a space heater and 7 sweaters in the corner, right? So it's all of these different things where you can say, how do we make an environment a place where we can all be successful, where we can all put our best foot forward, where we can all figure out what we need. And of course, we don't all need the same things, right? So a lot of it is about preferences and options and really actually listening to and caring about the human experience. And I think it's really important for us to remember that that does have a hard and fast business result, right? I refer to it as this concept of the ROI of kindness. But if you want your employees to innovate and drive and move at the pace of digital and AI in 2025, you absolutely need to do it through buy-in and listening and understanding what motivates them, right? I just saw a really interesting piece in the Washington Post about how something like 67% of American workers are not only not using AI, but actively dismantling their company's efforts to implement it. And it's remarkable because that makes you say, well, then we must be doing something wrong. We must not be listening to what those team members need in order to successfully do their job, shift their job, innovate, and thrive, right? And so to me, a lot of this comes down to the driving force of listening to people and what they need.
Oh, I feel like in that sense, we're speaking the same language. Honestly, just I never get away from the superpower of listening to understand. And it's also some of the hardest work I continue to do as a leader, even though I've trained leadership summits on listening to understand in many countries around the globe for years. It's some of the hardest work I do to listen for facts, feelings, and values, suspend judgment, make sure I'm mirroring, the tone even of in the body language, especially cross-culturally, especially, with, neurodivergent populations who may not prefer to make eye contact because they listen better when they don't, and all these types of things that require a lot of brain power. It's people call that a soft skill, and I just find that wild because it's really hard, and it's a durable skill that doesn't seem to be going away for me personally. But I agree. I think the more we listen to our employees, there's whole roles at some of the Silicon Valley companies around here of just employee listening because people realize what a big deal it is. And there's a lot of great research out of Stanford and other places that show people work best with autonomy of how they work best. And if you give people any amount of autonomy to say, this is how I work best, it really does increase the output. And isn't that what we brought this talent in for, was to produce something, to give us the best work they possibly can? And why would we want to put obstacles in the way unnecessarily? So let's talk about practical transformation for a second. If we have a company, a CEO or a CHRO or someone's listening, and they want to become, truly neurodiverse friendly, where should they start? And what are some key shifts in the culture, the hiring practices, or even the workplace design that make the biggest difference?
So I think, first of all, just stopping and recognizing that neurodiversity is important is the start of everything, right? And one of the things I will say to every CEO I meet until the day I die is that you already have a neurodivergent team. Right? I promise you, whether they share it with you or not, whether they disclose, whether they even know themselves, right? Because we weren't so great at diagnosis in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. You have a neurodivergent team. It's about 1 in 5 of us, right? About 20% of us are some form of neurodivergent. So just starting there and being aware and starting to incorporate it into your vernacular, your considerations, your culture, your policies. That's step one, and that's meaningful, and that matters. The second thing I recommend is really truly under the umbrella of the power of listening, right? I'm seeing a lot of neurodiversity ERGs be created around the country. It's not something I saw 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. I think it's really over the past year or two where employees who are neurodivergent or have neurodivergent children and all of a sudden want to build a better world, want to have their voices heard. They want to have a sense of community. They want to be able to unmask around each other. So I think creating that space can be incredibly valuable. And then listen to those people, right? So the people that form that group and share things about what to do. And then just thirdly, a culture that is open to listening to human needs, right? Whether it's about neurodiversity or physical disability or the things we all go through with caregiving and life, really putting humans first at your workplace, I truly believe that has a business outcome. And by doing that, you're also going to be taking care of their neurodiversity needs. And I could go on, you could go on forever about sensory spaces and lighting and hiring practices. And we have some great information on our website and online with hundreds of different tips you can use to create a more neuro-inclusive organization. But it is truly, truly the cultural shift to acceptance and embracing that matters the most.
So helpful. I just am really excited to see some of the companies starting to make some of these changes. It's long overdue. And even the company I recently exited, we had a neurodiversity ERG, and I myself just learned so much from their presentations. From then suddenly realizing individuals within the company identified in that way, and it allowed me to understand them a little differently since they sort of had this kind of coming out with the ERG kind of situation as well. And it gives them a space to have other people around them that they can talk with that also kind of innovate for us as companies as we listen to what they're coming up with. And as you said, often it's something that's free and not really going to put us out at all to help them do. And if it's going to help that employee contribute more in any capacity, why wouldn't we? So the tech industry specifically here in Silicon Valley talks a lot about innovation. That's a big word that we love. And we know from research that cultivation of psychological safety, which means the ability to question and push back, is very much what leads to that, according to Google's Project Aristotle. Thinking differently, as long as we allow those opinions to, if you're a manager and you roll out something new, and then you give the psychological safety for people to say, oh, I have a question about that, or push back on it. Cultivating that psychological safety is important. And we often find in the neurodivergent community, they're going to see those things differently. They're going to see the patterns. They're going to see around the corner. They're going to be the first to notice something visually often. And it can be remarkable. But sometimes it can be very rigid in these workplace cultures where questioning your boss, questioning your manager is taboo, especially in the US context of how decisions are made. So what do you think needs to change, especially as you look at tech, to create environments where neurodivergent professionals can thrive and have their voice heard in moments like these specifically?
Yeah, I love that you brought up the deep intersection between innovation and psychological safety. This is one of my favorite topics. So prior to my work at Aspiritech, I spent 25 years in digital transformation for media companies. And when you're leading digital transformation at large companies, medium-sized companies, small companies, it doesn't matter. Really, truly, that psychological safety is not only a necessary component. It's imperative. If you do not have it, it's not going to work. You're not going to have change, right? True and meaningful change. And yes, it's psychological safety to be able to give feedback about what's working and what's not working, but it's also psychological safety to fail, right? When we are moving quickly, when we are trying new things, sometimes it's going to go right. And inevitably, it's going to go wrong, right? And so how do you treat people when things go wrong? Is it finger pointing? Is it blame? Is it firing or whatever it might be? that is damaging to people, right? They'll all of a sudden hide and they'll be afraid to innovate and try new things and to bring their ideas out. And they'll say, well, there's no motivation for me to do that, right? Why wouldn't I just keep doing it the same way that I know is going to work and isn't going to get me in trouble? So I think it's just essential, absolutely essential. So really, to me, that is a cultural shift, right? It is how you as a leader treat people in good times and in bad, in times of success and in times of failure, right? As a leader, are you living by that adage? I'm going to give credit, take blame, because that's a huge part of creating psychological safety, right? You have to be willing to stand in front of the firing squad when things go wrong and then shower your team with praises for the work that they are doing that goes right, right? So it's a cultural shift and it happens on a daily basis. I think some of it needs to be driven in our training and upskilling of middle managers, right? I think so often people go from being individual performers to management because they're great at being individual performers, but we're not coaching or teaching people how to be excellent managers, how to advocate for your team members, what that shift means and what it should look like, how the way you're treating your team members impacts everything every day. I mean, middle managers are more close to most of the team than executives ever will be, right? But I think executives have a high level of responsibility there too. And I think it's noticeable when we have executives who at one time earned the salary of an entry-level person at their team members, and then the difference between executives who haven't, have no idea what it's like to live at that level. So that was maybe more than you wanted.
No, it was great. Oh my goodness. We could just have like 5 conversations off of every one of those because I resonated with every single thing you said. And I think that, in one sense, I've seen the same thing what you're talking about, where individual contributors get promoted to manager because they do a particular skill well. And on the one hand, it's not fair to bring a manager in to a role for skills they don't have. Or
Yeah, absolutely.
worse, even worse, not give them those skills once they become managers, because honestly, manager training is way more rare than it should be. And at the bottom, just base level is that whole, like we mentioned, the cultivation of psychological safety, which many people never get trained on. And they've probably, in some cases, had modeled for them by maybe their own manager, of just this command and control, which leadership is changing. We know from neuroscience that's not working, and that's why we're changing it. But at the same time, you see too many who actually do blame their staff, which is not what you should do. If it's your team you're leading, you take the blame. And that the role of the manager is to support their direct reports to get the work done, instead of just tell them to do it and leave them to the wolves and blame them when it goes wrong. Like, that is not leadership. Leadership means we're in this, and what support do you need? Making sure you're checking in, making sure you're giving people the support they need. I think the situational leadership model with Ken Blanchard is just this 4-quadrant where it's S1, D1, like a manager can know this is where you need more support. This is where you need less support. So even having those conversations, so many managers don't ever get trained on, and they certainly don't get promoted into those roles for having those skills. So as you look at that for Aspiritech, I'm wondering, what does success look like for Aspiritech, first of all? And then also, could you maybe share a story of an employee or a client interaction, that really captures this difference that happens when we create truly inclusive workplaces? What happens there?
Yeah. So in terms of Aspiritech and how we measure and how we look at this, right? We are a tech services company, right? That's what we do. That's what we offer. But our mission is truly our employees, right? Our employees are our mission. And so that creates this wonderful space where we can be completely dedicated to them, right? We can do our best to offer the best benefits, to the best culture, the best workplace. But it also means that that's how we can and should measure success, right? So we do an employee engagement survey. We look at where we're doing great where people are really happy. We look at where we're falling down and we might need to work on things. For example, 2 years ago, our surveys found that people were craving more upskilling opportunities. So we offered, more training and development opportunities specifically around management and leadership. Funny enough, right? And so those are things that are really, really important to us. Um, Oh my gosh, I have so many stories. So to narrow it down to one always seems a little bit difficult. But we do an incredible amount of user testing with an aim of accessibility for all. So for blind users, for deaf users, for neurodivergent users. And we recently had the great privilege of testing an app for neurodivergent children. And so it was this really wonderful intersection, right, where autistic adults were getting to give feedback on what they would have liked their experience to be like as neurodivergent children, on the technical aspects of the app, on how to best tap into those neurodivergent minds at a young age. And it was incredible to see because so much of what we do for children is based on a medical model and neurotypical therapists and psychiatrists talking about what we should do for them. And this was all about neurodivergent adults thinking about their childhood selves and how they could have made their lives better. And so it was just this huge client win. It was a win for us, but it also felt like a win for our entire community.
Oh, I love that so much because it really centers them. And aren't they the best teachers for the experience of the embodied experience of what it's meant to walk through the world for years and years of a lifespan and be the ones as adults to look back on their childhood self? I hope that brought some people a version of hope and healing and even some grief that they needed to work through themselves because I could imagine um, there would be some grief of what I wish I would have had that I didn't have, the support I needed that I didn't get, whether in school or in home or in a community. Even faith spaces is a whole other space for a lot of people. And so, but the ability to look back on what would, the little version of them need at 8 years old or whatever, and to say, I can make a difference here by contributing to this. That's really powerful. I'm thinking about the listeners who actually are neurodivergent themselves and or allies and who want to change their own workplaces. What is one action they could take this week to move forward toward a more neurodiverse, inclusive environment?
So I love this question, and I talk about this all the time, but I think we are our own biggest critics, right? We are always like, what is wrong with me? What do I need to work on? What do I need to fix? So there's constant like self-improvement books, self-improvement apps, etc. Right? It's coming at us all the time. But so rarely do we stop and give ourselves a little bit of grace and say, what do I need? So not what am I going to give, not what am I bad at, just what do I need? And I think that's a really important exercise for all of us to just take a moment and say, what do I need to be my best self, to put my best foot forward, to feel like I'm contributing in a major way? And then give it to yourself and see how good that feels and see how it helps you be more productive and better in your workplace and in your life. And I think that is especially important for neurodivergent people, but it really benefits all of us.
It really does. And that's the incredible thing is I think that when we get away from sort of transactional relationships and realize that transformational relationships where there's a give and take and a mutual support of one another, it not only feels so much better, but if we're talking ROI from relationships, if we were going to measure that, really what a world we would create if we were helping and supporting one another in all of our differences because we're all as different as our fingerprint and we all need a little help sometimes. And if a system or a workplace was created for you and you've got the wind at your back, then great. But there are probably spaces in life, if you haven't hit them yet, maybe as you get older, or God forbid, get in an accident yourself and need a little help that you'll realize it. And so better to just start doing that now. So I love your call to action there. And I think it's a really important one for people in workplaces everywhere. And I hope that if you're in the neurodivergent community and you're listening, that we have done a good job of representing you well, and excited to introduce you to Tara if this is your first time to meet her. Tara, if people want to reach out to you for more information, how can they find you?
I think one of the best ways is visit our website, www.aspiritech.org. But I am also incredibly active on LinkedIn. I have a lot of conversations around workplace culture, and I'd love to connect with you there.
Thank you so much. I'm going to have you hang out with our difference makers in a bit to ask you another question there, but thank you for this interview. You're so inspiring. What you're doing is absolutely incredible and just makes my heart so happy. I have a big smile on my face just hearing your stories and having this conversation with you. So I wish you all the best in 2026 as you continue to build this incredible business.
Thank you for having me, Lori. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, difference makers, for being here. Not just for listening, for being the kind of person who shows up for conversations just like this one, because you believe the world gets better when we understand each other more. And that is who difference makers are. And you are one of them. There are two ways to go even deeper. On Patreon at patreon.com/aworldofdifference. For $7 a month, you get bonus conversations and community. 25 gets you into the room where the real talk happens, live every quarter with me directly. On Substack, paid subscribers get full essays, no paywall, and a monthly live conversation where I say the things I can't say anywhere else. Links to both of those are in the show notes, and I would love for you to join me in both of those places. If this episode stayed with you, share it with 5 people you know who need this right now. That is how we grow this, and that is how we grow ourselves at the same time. I am Lori Adams Brown. Until next time, difference makers, go keep making a difference.